In this video I'm going to take us for a review of our course so far. By doing this I hope to give you an idea of why the various topics have been included in the course by taking us through the Moodle modules one by one. This should also give us useful review for the final exam, and I will take you through some general exam advice and recommended study approaches towards the end. Let's have a look now at Moodle. When we go to the course, we find that overall we're looking at property as an investment, and by and large we're looking at specialised, complex, usually income producing properties. We're also looking at property development. And so that's the general theme: large, complex, specialised and income producing properties, and what valuation challenges are posed by them. The first topic is really an introduction, and if we look through the Moodle entry we find that most of it has to do with pretty much revision, focusing on property cash flow analysis and the practical Excel spreadsheets skills that are associated with property cash flow analysis. You'll notice that we've introduced in this first module just really the warm-up exercises for those things that you need to be able to do pretty well in Excel to understand the way that we handle DCF analysis, cash flow analysis, if you like, in valuation. It's important when you go through these introductory exercises that you also parallel your work not just with the Excel spreadsheet but also with a financial calculator. You'll find that in practice it's very useful to be able to step away from the computer to do some calculations or some checks with using a financial calculator, either to check your own work or to maybe extend the work of others or to do some analysis that somebody else hasn't done. And so when we look at this first module, we can really say we're introducing the idea of property as investment, but specifically those introductory skills that are important for mathematical analysis. And while that's primarily in the Excel world, it's also important that you do it or check it with a financial calculator. We really extend that in the second topic, where the main activity tends to be the exercise worksheet. We've got a theory and so on, which again really extends this idea of property as an investment, because especially in the United States, property is considered as nothing more than a form of right to a series of cash flows. And so cash flow analysis becomes mighty important. And it's really this property as cash flows which is the underlying theme in much of this course. The third topic in Moodle is partial interests in land. Now really this is probably one of the most important topic areas to get your head around. This is not simply because it's going to pop its ugly head up in the exam, it may or may not, but because if you understand the concepts in this topic especially, you will understand the way that property cash flows fit together, how they work. The real issue here is to distinguish between the various property interests in land. The classic partial interest question is between the landowner and the lessee. But we're taking partial interest a little bit further here because we're looking at the question of ground rent, and really beyond that is the notion of different entities, different owners if you like, different investors, owning different aspects of the real estate asset and then being able to unpick those, pack them into which set of interests belong here, which set there, and how do we value them. Now by the time you've done the first two modules, you should be now humming along being able to analyse these sets of cash flows once we split them out into these partial interests pretty effectively. And so while topic 3 is very important, it's kind of the icing on the cake that you've been working up to in the first two areas where we've been looking at the property as cash flow and the analysis required for them. And so I'd recommend that you use the partial interests in land module as a way of understanding two things: the application of your property cash flow analysis techniques, but also looking at property rights as this complex bundle which can be split either between a landlord and a tenant, or maybe between some other examples can include, say, the owner of an easement compared to the owner of the land. There are a number of ways that partial interests can be allocated. When we get down to looking at customary property interests, we find that that can be understood very easily if you have a good grasp of the partial interest problem. We then move to topics 4 and 5. And really, these are two topics which are the one basic area, and that is the whole property economics of development property. In this, we're going to be taking the Turner model and getting as much out of that as we can, and hopefully you'll experience the way that the Turner model that you are able to build gives surprisingly good results despite its simplicity compared to the elaborate industry standard package, Estate Master, which we'll also be having a bit of a look at. The important thing with the valuation of land is the feasibility analysis, and that's really what the Turner model does to a certain extent. But from that, the theoretical insight that you get from really having a strong understanding of property development economics is that the land under the development is where all of the profit ends up eventually soaking down to. Sure enough, the developer is able to take what appears to be a fairly comfortable profit, maybe 25, 35%, even in some cases IRRs in the low 30% area, which sounds pretty impressive. If I was able to invest $1 today and get $1.30 at the end of the year, well, I certainly couldn't get that by sticking my money in the bank. However, even that pales into insignificance compared to the capital gains that the landowner is able to enjoy once land is ripe for development and development approval is obtained. We don't get too far into the strategies associated with development. Unfortunately, we don't have space in this course for that very interesting and very important area. But what we do take you through here is the way that the land under development is a residual, and by now you should be very familiar with that, and also how to analyse it using the Turner model. That pretty much takes care of topic number 4. Being able to do at least some of the calculations associated with the Turner model on a financial calculator pretty much off by heart is a pretty useful skill to take away with you. Topic 5, as I say, is the twin sister of the development economics part of the course, and there we're really focusing on applying what we've seen in the previous model to the Estate Master model. Now, this is a very important model to be familiar with. The reason is that many of you will find that as you move into practice, having some familiarity with Estate Master looks very good on your CV. We have the opportunity, which you've already come across, to be able to enrol in the Estate Master's own training program, which brings you, if you go through with it, their own certification. Now, this is an industry certification, it's not a university certification, but it's highly valued in the marketplace in Australia and elsewhere. Estate Master originated in Australia, but it's software which is now used in many countries in the world. Definitely worth being familiar with. When we move to topic 6, we really change gears. We're starting to look at one of the probably most interesting and challenging areas of specialist property valuation. In this topic, we look at the valuation of land affected by customary rights. Now, there's not much mathematics in this module. In fact, there's virtually no mathematics in it at all. If you're shrewd, you'll notice that the analysis of this valuation problem actually is best done by applying what you learnt back in Module 3 from the partial interests. However, we have to get our head around some very interesting but apparently non-economic issues to really understand the customary rights and how it impacts on value. And so going through there, we look at it as a theory issue, but also an intercultural issue. And I think this is a very good opportunity for you to do battle with the way that land rights as we understand them in Australia is not what land rights must be or have to be or always have been. They simply happen to be what white Australians happen to do at this point in time. If we had more time, we would take you through the way that even in Europe, the whole notion of land and the way we own it and use it has changed radically. And private ownership, as we understand it, is an invention really of only the last few centuries. And so when we step back and say, well, you know, those Aboriginal people have a pretty weird form of land tenure, we actually don't know our own history. And because if you go back to the pre-modern era in Europe, we find that much of our land tenure back then was surprisingly similar to the core values, practices and principles that lie behind almost every customary landowning group in the world. And the other peculiarity about customary people is that regardless of whether they're in Australia or in Africa or America, cultures which have had no historical contact with each other, at least as far as recorded history understands, they all do property pretty much the same. They all have the same concerns and they all have pretty much the same raft of conflicts with land economists or land systems such as we have in Australia. And so this topic is very, very important because not only does it cover the concepts behind it, but it also introduces some of the issues involved in the valuation of these interests. Topic 7 is a very practical topic. By now you will have mastered that for the assignment, and so we really don't need to go too much further at this point. You've already demonstrated your ability of being able to write reports and appropriate reports in the assignment. Let's move on to topic 8. Topic 8 is intended to sensitize you to the fact that the property world is not stagnant. There are issues which are bubbling up for prominence and become very, very important almost year by year. In the last few years, for instance, the rural sector has been affected by a number of changes to property rights, including very stringent environmental controls. And probably the most remarkable is the emergence and now dominance of water property trading and the existence now of an entire property type known as water property. So we look a little bit at this phenomenon. There are also other emerging issues to do with the nature of urban property rights, the question of affordable housing, valuation issues both in theory and practice, and quite a number of others. Now, this module is not intended to cover all of those, but rather make you aware that these are areas or demonstrations of the way that property is dynamic, and through your professional lives you're going to have to take up new challenges and interpret new approaches to property as you go through your life. You can't simply sit back and say, well, I studied my course back at CQU in year X and that's it, I understand property, because you'll find that property will be changing into the future and we can only guess what some of those changes will be. Obviously it's good to have completed the readings in this module area and be able to comment on them and the ideas and challenges that they put forward. But also hopefully the take home is not just to be familiar with these new areas, but to be aware that you're going to have to continue to keep up to date and study new developments in property. Usually you'll do this by taking an interest in your membership in organisations such as the Australian Property Institute. Moving along to topic 9, we get to plant and machinery valuation. Plant machinery valuation is a particularly interesting area of property because it deals with non-real estate property and the valuation challenges associated with it. Like real estate valuation, we revert back to the IVSC for the basic standards for property, for plant machinery valuation. But it's important to go through at least the concepts in this topic to get an idea for the way that non-real estate property assets behave, and the way that when we go to plant machinery valuation, things like depreciated replacement value suddenly starts to take a far stronger place in the array of approaches to valuation. And it's useful for you by now to have thought through the way that the reason this essentially cost approach is so important in plant and machinery valuation, but relatively unimportant in real estate valuation. It tells us something about the nature of real estate. It's also important for you to have had some exposure to plant and machinery valuation before you graduate as a valuer, because you'll find that even if you see yourself as being exclusively devoted to real estate, you'll still find plant and machinery valuation issues come up from time to time, especially when you're dealing with the valuation of complex properties, where plant and machinery is an important component of the value of the property. This happens, for instance, in licensed premises, where you will have machinery associated with either the bar or air conditioning or perhaps a dairy farm with all of its equipment and so on. And so being able to have a feel and an understanding of the way that plant machinery valuation is done is very, very important. So topic 9 is an important area. We move then to topic 10, which specifically looks at specialist valuations. Now, we've already covered a couple of specialist areas. That was in plant machinery valuation and the valuation of land affected by customary rights. But in this module, we look at the more general area of specialist valuations. What do we mean by specialist valuation? They are properties which, due to their size, complexity, and often the close association of a business activity with the actual fabric of the building, so specialised factories, licensed premises, motels, service stations, childcare centres, hospitals, are all buildings which are pretty much worthless, useless, if they're not used for their intended purpose. Conversely, if you want to run a hospital, you can't do it in a tin shed, or at least not do it very well in our culture. And so we need to understand this interaction. It turns out that most specialist property types have their own particular themes or approaches. So the way that you would value a motel is going to be different to the way that you would value a childcare centre. But developing a bit of an understanding of the basic rules, if you like, of specialist valuation, what to look out for, how to be sensitive to the various factors and ratios that you might look at, is an important learning in this particular module, as well as dipping our toes into examples of one or two specialist areas. We can look at this as an example of a cash flow question, if you like. Those of you who have read through the readings and the notes for this topic will have already discovered that ultimately specialist properties tend to find that they're valued the same way as other properties, but with more of an interest or more of an emphasis on the income approach, and often the income approach is arrived at through various shorthands, a bit like beast area valuation in rural valuation, with specialist properties, for instance, newsagents will be valued largely on the basis of how many newspapers they sell, or licensed premises on the sales of liquor and so on. So a specialist valuation topic covers a lot of specific areas, but for the purposes of this course, the important thing to take away is the overall approach, what to be sensitive for in specialist valuations, and the overall balance of the three methods and how they're applied. We then move to topic 11, which is professional practice in valuation. This really takes some of the ideas that were introduced in our first valuation course somewhat further and deeper. The emphasis here is looking at the question of professionalism and getting a bit of a feel for how property valuation stands up as a genuine profession. On the other side, it then takes this idea of the professional further into why it is that a professional needs a code of practice and what it really means in terms of how we follow it. Hopefully this topic will have given you something to reflect on in terms of the obligations you have to the community. Again, it's based on reading and it's theory, but this is extraordinarily important because this area is considered very seriously for the Australian Property Institute for maintaining your valuation registration. It's also valued highly by the university as an important graduate attribute. So I recommend that you take the readings in this topic quite seriously. Finally, we come to the question of property and the environment. For most of you, you would have been learning about the environment from about the time you were in kindergarten. Hopefully, the insights and perspectives presented in this module will round out your exposure to the environmental issues that are currently dominating our culture's thinking. It's important to always ground our understanding of environmental issues on science and the development of scientific understandings. In the area of the environment, one thing that stands out quite prominently is the immaturity of our understanding of many environmental processes. We find it very difficult to forecast the weather a week in advance. It makes it a little foolhardy to be trying to predict the weather in 50, 100 or 1,000 years' time. However, science has been progressing and looking at these various factors. On some occasions we get some insights which cause us considerable concern, but it seems to have been the case that in most cases, as we dig further and learn more, we find that our understanding tends to sort of balance out somewhat. Because real estate is intimately connected with the earth and land value is also connected with the way that we allow land to be used, environmental issues are very, very important for the long-term valuation of property. It has a great influence on that pattern of cash flows that we introduce the course with. So it's important to be able to present a balanced argument, presenting the scientific findings as they exist at present on both sides of the issue in order to be able to answer questions on property and the environment. So that takes us through our 12 modules, and hopefully they have given you a rounded understanding of the most challenging aspects of property economics and property valuation. As I mentioned at the outset, the partial interest and that cash flow ability is pretty much your core technical skill, but then it needs to be applied and applied creatively and flexibly to a wide range of different situations, from customary property to plant and machinery and possibly environmental property issues. So that's pretty much the course in a nutshell. Let's look now briefly at the assessment, and particularly the examination. You'll find that if you go to the assessment block and click on the examination tab, you will find that there's an opening there, a link there, that brings you two resources. One is notes on examination preparation, which if you've followed this video you will know considerably more than what is on that document. And the second is a past paper, and so you may load a past paper from that. That's actually the 2013 paper, and it's fairly representative of the style of what the paper is going to be this year. To look at the paper for this year, what I can tell you is that the paper consists of two parts. The first part will be relying on your ability to be able to do some property mathematics, some cash flow mathematics. We'll be giving you a case study or a set of data and asking you to perform some calculations on it. That might be in the area of partial interest, could be in the area of development, could be in the area of applying those things to a case study, maybe from the plant and machinery or specialist areas. So being able to go in with your financial calculator all charged up and ready to go and be able to do some calculations will get you through the case study that makes up the first part of the exam. Part B of the paper consists of short essay questions. Now, by nature, we've already gone through some calculations in Part B, so the thing that you can be comfortable with is that Part B will not have calculations in it, and they will be short essays of 10 marks each, and so that means that you'll be looking to write somewhere between maybe half a page at the very shortest if you really know your stuff and are able to present a very compact answer, to maybe 2 or 3 pages if you're a bit verbose and want to put a lot of detail in, or somewhere in between. The emphasis is going to be on theory, and so it's ideas, so you'll need to be able to express yourself, write your paragraphs and so on. In some cases the questions may benefit from you drawing a diagram to illustrate some aspect of the issue or the aspect of theory which is being addressed. You only have to do a small number of questions and you will have a selection, so you'll be able to choose the ones that suit you. Unfortunately, the university looks very poorly on giving hints as to which topics will be in the various parts of the exam, so I really can't say any more except to point out that the balance between mathematical skills, which is Part A, can come from the modules that we've already highlighted, but also the theory questions, well, you can see for yourself what modules you'll need to look at and the kind of global issues that are dealt with in each of the modules. And as long as you have a global understanding of the theme of each topic, you'll come away with a pass. For students that want a better result, obviously you'll have to have a more complete answer with a easier to follow structure, and that will sort of take you into the credit distinction area. Because better students are more likely to have read and assimilated different perspectives. To get the highest grade, I'd recommend that you go in armed with evidence of having read more than the minimum, that's more than the theory notes, and be able to maybe bring in a citation, maybe a quote here or there for the important things, or at least be able to refer to authors or in some way show that you really have the literature and the different perspective at your fingertips, and especially evidence that you're familiar with some of the prominent authors. But that's really for the high distinction end, and you can scale yourself in the middle there depending on where you want to go. So read the theory notes and have a vague idea of what's going on will get you a pass. Be a wider reader and able to talk confidently and in a well-structured argument, quoting authors and maybe a quote will get you a high distinction. It's really an opportunity where you can choose the result that you come away with. All said and done, I hope you've enjoyed the course and find it useful. The exercises that I've taken you through, and especially the assignments, were really aimed at giving you exposure to some of the most challenging areas in the property discipline. And what this means is that if you come away with a pass or better in this course, and I'm sure just about all of you will, in fact I hope all of you do, there's no reason why all of you shouldn't, you should be able to confidently go into any aspect of the property industry and function effectively. That can be in valuation, of course, but it can also be in the more challenging areas of consulting or property development, or even the obscure area of funds management and asset management, because really the skills that we've given you here give you the bones to be able to go into those areas. And by the way, don't forget plant and machinery valuation, because if you take a specialisation in that, you will find that you will be lining up with a relatively small group of valuers in Australia that tend to run especially successful businesses. So don't leave the humble area of valuing plant and machinery out of your sights for your career. All the best with the exam, and I hope you've enjoyed the course.